What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today. We're talking about the running backs. We're going to start and sit here for Week 16 fantasy football. That's right, the fantasy playoffs are upon us, and we got to make the best choices possible. Got a lot of information on a lot of players for you here in this video. If you're looking for certain players, there's timestamps down below. Hit the like button for some timestamps, and we're not wasting any more time because we got football on Thursday. We got football on Saturday. We got football in Christmas on Sunday. We got football on Monday. We have football all over the place here this week. Plus, a lot of things going on for the holidays. Don't forget to set your lineups early. A lot of games on Saturday. But let's go ahead and kick it off. Thursday Night Football with a matchup between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New York Jets. And we'll kick it off right here with Travis Etienne. It was nice to see him score double-digit points once again here in fantasy football just last weekend. Wasn't a huge game, though. Had 127 total yards, no touchdowns. But as of late, this dude's schedule has been horrible with matchups against Baltimore, Detroit, Tennessee, Dallas. Now he gets a matchup against the Jets, and then in 2 weeks gets Tennessee again. Not ideal for Travis Etienne fantasy owners out there, but he is averaging just over 15 touches a game on the year, but we have seen a slight increase in his touches now over the last 3 games played. Remember, he was dealing with a minor injury there middle of the season, had 21 touches last week, so that is definitely a good sign, but now a matchup going up against the Jets. They allow 18.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That is 9th fewest in the league, but they have allowed over 100 yards rushing to opponents now in 4 straight ball games. The injury up front to defensive tackle Quinnen Williams, who's still not 100% healthy, has been allowing teams to run with a little bit more success when it comes to injuries. All of a sudden, this offensive line is getting pretty banged up. Brandon Scherf, Jawan Taylor, questionable this week. Left tackle Cam Robinson, he's now done for the year. But Etienne has shown in the past that he doesn't need to have a touchdown to be fantasy startable. The volume is there. The big play potential is there. And the Jags continue to score a lot of points. They've scored at least 27 points now in 4 of their last 6 ball games. The touchdown chances are going to be coming for Travis Etienne. There is some rain expected in this ball game, and if that's the case, could mean a little bit more heavy reliancy on the running game as well. So that's something to pay attention to. His opponent, Bam Knight, Michael Carter. Okay, so I had some concerns last week with Bam Knight. He wasn't even ranked inside my top 24, but he was listed as a fringe start, as a flex play if needed. Dude went 13 carries for 23 yards and no receiving work. He had at least 2 receptions in the 3 games prior. Didn't get any of that with Zach Wilson. Now, as a starter, Bam Knight's averaging right around 17 touches a game, where Michael Carter's still hovering right around 10 or so. A matchup this week going up against the Jags, they allow 21.6 fantasy points per game. That's 12th most in the league to opposing running backs, and they have allowed over 130 yards rushing a game in 4 of their last 5 contests. Now, this offensive line has basically just been a revolving door all year long. As soon as someone gets healthy, someone else gets hurt. It's just been happening all year long. This matchup is a lot easier this week than what it was last week for the Jets. We need to make sure they keep this game close, though. This Jacksonville offense is not one to really tempt on a weekly basis. They can score points. We got to pound the rock and keep the clock running for the New York Jets if they want to have a chance in this ball game. Bam Knight, more of a low-end flex play with some upside, not somebody who's going to be ranked very high in my rankings, though. All right, how about we go over to Saturday football now, and we'll kick it off with the Atlanta Falcons and Baltimore Ravens. Starting off for Atlanta, you got Cordero Patterson, you got Tyler Algier. But did we just kind of see Tyler Algier take over this backfield in Atlanta last weekend? 17 carries for 139 yards and a touchdown against New Orleans just last week. By far his best game of the season, the most touches he's had in a game, his first 100-yard rushing game of his career. Both Patterson and Algier both found the end zone last week, which was great. They're both hovering right around 13 to 15 touches per ball game, but now they're going against Baltimore. And Baltimore allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs on the season, and they've only allowed over 100 yards rushing one time since week 7, and that was against the Cleveland Browns. Now, Caleb Huntley, done for the year. One less back to really worry about in this backfield, but this offensive line is still heavily banged up. As much as I think, in my own personal opinion, that they should be utilizing Cordero Patterson more, especially in the receiving game, they're choosing not to. It is mind-blowing for me that he only has 12 receptions on the year. This split is pretty solid, and as the season goes on, we're seeing more and more Tyler Algier. I don't think this is one of those matchups where these guys are going to find it easy to find the end zone in a difficult matchup against Baltimore. I'm going to exercise some caution here and avoid this backfield altogether. Their opponents, we got J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, and J.K. just did it again. 120 plus rushing yards now in back-to-back ball games. He's averaging almost 9 yards per carry over his last 2 games. Now, he's not getting much in the passing work side of things, but he is the clear leader in this backfield over Gus Edwards. Now, on the season, both these guys averaging right around 12 touches a game. Even in these back-to-back games that J.K. Dobbins has exploded in, he's only averaging 14 touches a contest, so he's not getting huge volume, which is good because we've mentioned the rehab of this injury to his knee numerous weeks. We don't want him to be overworked. It's going to increase the likelihood that he suffers another injury. So them only giving him 14 touches a game with the production we're getting is almost too good to be true, right? Now they're going up against Atlanta. Atlanta allows over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs and has allowed over 130 yards rushing in 6 of their last 7 games themselves. No other major injuries of concern here for the Ravens, and obviously this efficiency can't last, right? He's not going to rush for 9 yards per carry for the rest of the season in every game. That's not doable, but the volume isn't overly high either. So when the efficiency starts to come down, if he doesn't score touchdowns, he's not getting the volume to give you the safe floor. But in a great matchup like this, going up against Atlanta, I'm going to fire up J.K. Dobbins once again. How about the Detroit Lions and Carolina Panthers now? We'll start off with the Lions. And not too long ago, this was a backfield that was lovable, right? We love starting the backfield, especially Jamal Williams of the Detroit Lions. Now, it's harder to trust than a post-White Castle fart because neither one of these guys are really consistent as of right now, and I partially blame the involvement of Justin Jackson. Now, he's not getting a ton of volume, but he's getting volume that used to go the way of Jamal Williams for the most part, and because of that, we're not seeing the touchdowns now in back-to-back games. Plus, there's also been some penalties. If you've been watching the Lions here as of late, there's been a few big plays by DeAndre Swift, a touchdown that was called back that Jamal Williams had scored. It's just some stupid penalties that are taking fantasy points off the board. Now, Swift, he's still hovering right around 10 touches per game. Jay Will hovering right around 17 or so, but that number is starting to drop fast. Neither one of these backs have played over 30 snaps now in back-to-back ball games. This week, they find themselves going up against the Carolina Panthers, who allow 21.3 fantasy points per game, 13th most in the league. Most of their injuries are on the defensive side of the football, with the exception of the offensive line still being banged up slightly there. Neither one of these running backs have exceeded 66 rushing yards in a game over the last month of the season, and it's going to be pretty dang cold out there. A lot of these games that we're talking about here this weekend are going to be dealing with some frigid temperatures. It's going to be like a Penguins taint out there for a lot of these ball games. I expect them to maybe be a little bit more run heavy, and for that reason, in this matchup, I'll gamble with both of these guys, but they're not going to be overly high in my rankings. For the backfield of the Carolina Panthers, I'm just going to say it, because I know you're thinking it, but this backfield sucks now for fantasy football. We got split touches, minimal production, a team that's trailing more times than not and having to throw the football. You still have D'Onta Foreman, who's leading this backfield in touches, but not really getting anything with them. You have Chuba Hubbard starting to get some volume, looking pretty good, but not getting enough volume to become startable. And now a matchup going up against Detroit, who on paper allows 17.8 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but hasn't allowed 100 yards rushing to a team in 4 of their last 5 games, and the one that they did was really thanks in part to Josh Allen. Sam Darnold does not equal Josh Allen. No other major injuries of concern here, but as of late we've seen Foreman struggle against inferior talent over the last couple of weeks. Are we going to trust him in a split backfield against a very difficult run defense for the Detroit Lions? I'm not testing this defense this week in this spot. Both these guys are going to be a sit. How about the Buffalo Bills and Chicago Bears? Another backfield I'm not overly excited for in Buffalo. But when we enter this backfield, it's just another split to talk about. You got Devin Singletary and James Cook. The Bills haven't overly had to rely on their running game most of the season, and that's just going to continue from here on out. Plus, going to be another pretty cold game. A Friday blizzard is in the forecast with a high of 10 degrees on Saturday with a high chance of heavy wind. Now, Devin Singletary himself averaging right around 14 touches a game. Cook barely struggling to get to 10 per contest. Even though we want him to have more, they're not listening to us in Buffalo. Chicago, they do allow 23.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, though 7th most in the league. The offensive line still struggling to stay healthy in Buffalo. Ryan Bates, Mitch Morse, they're still banged up. Each of these guys have only scored over 10 fantasy points one time over the last month. It's just not safe in this backfield in Buffalo. We have sporadic volume, minimal production, a good matchup, maybe a flex play if you need it, but more than likely with no teams on bye, you probably don't. So I'm sitting both members of this backfield. And honestly, I could probably say a lot of the same about the Chicago backfield. We enjoyed the solo running back days here in Chicago, but once again, we could be headed into a split with the return of Khalil Herbert. Do they bring him along slowly? We really don't know how much volume he's going to get in his first game back. David Montgomery has been doing pretty well with touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games, but the Chicago Bears have lost 7 straight games, and Justin Fields on a weekly basis is having to go out there and be the hero to just give this team a chance. Now, this was a pretty even split the last time these two were on the field together. They're going against Buffalo, who allows 19.2 fantasy points per contest, which is 22nd, but has just got taken advantage of by Raheem Mostert just last week on the ground. When you look at the injuries, they're all over the field. We got Chase Claypool, Equanimeous St. Brown, offensive tackle Tevin Jenkins, and Larry Borum. They're both banged up as well. The weather conditions say there's going to be more running, right? With the potential of the heavy wind and the snow, the cold temperatures, that just screams running game. But by who is the big question. Until we see Khalil Herbert's usage, I'm going to rely a little bit more on David Montgomery until we get a clearer picture going forward, which I know there's not a whole lot of time to get that picture, but I don't know if I want to trust Khalil Herbert in his first game back off of a hip injury, so we'll stick with David Montgomery in this matchup. All right, now let's go down to New Orleans and Cleveland up next for Alvin Kamara. It's sad to say, but we got excited last week when we see Alvin Kamara score 11 fantasy points, but that kind of sums up 2022 fantasy football, if I do say so myself. But that was his best game since week 8. It was his first 20 carry game since week 5, but he has no touchdowns now in 6 straight, which is the worst thing of all. He's still getting volume, averaging over 18 touches a game on the year, but now he gets a great matchup going up against Cleveland, who allows the 3rd most points in fantasy football to opposing running backs at 24.8 per game, and have allowed over 130 yards rushing in 4 of their last 6. The 2 that they didn't allow over 130 yards rushing, Houston and Tampa Bay, so no surprise there. No other major injuries of concern for New Orleans. It's another great matchup, but next week's won't be. So let's just try to take advantage of it this week. Would love to have another huge Alvin Kamara explosion game. But remember, this is another game played outdoors where there's going to be a chance of wind and cold weather once again, hoping that Alvin Kamara is the main beneficiary, and that's why he's a start once again. His opponents, we got Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and my heart hurts right now. This offense is a disaster in Cleveland. They haven't scored over 14 points in back-to-back back-to-back games now. Watson has really given the Browns a lack of offensive identity. They used to be a run-first team, a team that would beat their opponents up early in the running game and then throw it for the kill, for the win. Deshaun Watson is out there just trying to force too many things. They're trying to make Deshaun Watson what he was in like 2018. He's not to that point yet, and he doesn't have the weapons at his disposal to be there just yet. But now all of a sudden this offense has no identity. Are they a run-first team? Are they a pass-first team? Are they an evenly split? Who knows right now, because Deshaun Watson is just not playing that great. Now, luckily, Nick Chubb still averaging 19 touches per game. The Saints allowing over 20 fantasy points per contest, and they just allowed 231 yards rushing to the Atlanta Falcons last week. But Chubb has popped up on the injury report and is not practicing right now with a foot injury. So that's definitely something we're going to pay close attention to as the week progresses. We need Nick Chubb to be 100% in this ballgame. If for whatever reason Chubb were to sit, then yes, Kareem Hunt would become the start here. The explosive plays are gone in this offense. The goal line chances are depleted. The team struggling to commit to anything as of right now. The matchup is too good to sit Chubb at this point in time, but the ceiling for this running game has dramatically dropped. Exponentially dropped. We're used to be looking at a guy that on average we could kind of pencil in for about 15 fantasy points a game with the ceiling of like 30. Now if we hit double digits, we got banners being hung up and confetti falling, all thanks to the change in the offense from Kevin Stefanski and Deshaun Watson trying to get too cute here at the end of the season. As of right now, though, we roll with Chubby until we hear more news. The Seattle Seahawks, Kansas City Chiefs will start off with Seattle here first. Good to see Kenneth Walker back last week, even though a lot of people were overconfident in his return in a very difficult matchup last week against San Francisco. We still need to recognize that this is a team that has struggled to move the ball on the ground since the beginning of November. Kenneth Walker himself doesn't have over 50 yards rushing in a game since week 9. Sure, he's averaging over 15 touches per contest, but has also averaged under 4 yards per carry in 3 of his last 4 games. Now they're going up against Kansas City. They allow over 20 fantasy points per contest, 17th most in the league, kind of middle of the road. We still have injuries to DJ Dallas, Tyler Lockett now hurt as well. Could that lead to more volume going the way of the running game and Kenneth Walker? Seattle needs to keep this game close, and in order for that to happen, it needs to happen in the running game, and we need Kenneth Walker to approach 20 touches this week. That's how they're going to have a chance to win this ball game. A team that needs to keep winning, a team that has something to play for with temperatures once again near single digits. We need a heavy reliance on Kenneth Walker, and he'll be a start for us here this week. And then his opponents, Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. And fumbles in an Andy Reid offense will absolutely kill your chances at playing time, especially when the number 2 guy in the depth chart goes off in back-to-back games like we've seen from Jerick McKinnon. Now, Isaiah Pacheco has been running well, but has just played in his lowest snap percentage in a game since week 9. We're trying to see those numbers increase at this time of the year, not go backwards. Now, both these guys hovering right around 14 touches a game or so, but the pass work going the way of Jerick McKinnon, and that has been great. He's had at least 8 targets now in back-to-back ball games. Anyone else out there kind of look at this backfield and kind of get like a Dallas Cowboys type vibe, like a Diet Dallas type vibe with Zeke and Pollard? We got Pacheco and McKinnon. I mean, just some of that vibe. You see the big play potential of McKinnon like you see in Pollard. You see the between-the-tackle bruiser like you have with Isaiah Pacheco. He just doesn't score touchdowns like Zeke does, so there is that major difference. But now they're going against Seattle, who allows over 26 fantasy points per contest, second most in the league, and have given up over 170 yards rushing now in 4 straight ball games. There are no other major injuries of concern here for the Chiefs. Kansas City needs this run game to be effective going into the playoffs to keep opponents guessing. They don't want to become overly one-dimensional. Cold weather months are here. I could definitely see both of these guys having a role this week in those cold temperatures. The ceiling being the way of Jerick McKinnon, hoping for the touchdown on the ground, maybe a goal line carrier too for Isaiah Pacheco, as long as he can hold on to the freaking football, Isaiah. High and tight, my boy, high and tight. Hold it up there, and we'll hope for the best. Got both these guys as a start. How about we go down to the New York Giants and Minnesota Vikings now, which is going to be my Manscaped matchup of the week, Saquon Barkley and Dalvin Cook. But the holidays are here. It's literally this week. Maybe you're a last-minute shopper like I am. Don't worry, head over to manscaped.com, find yourself something for the holidays. Even if you get it just after Christmas, belated Christmas presents are just as good as Christmas presents on Christmas morning once you reach a certain age. And for the most part, everybody ordering Manscaped understands that. So make sure you use promo code HEADLINERS at checkout. Get 20% off and free shipping here over the holidays. Looking forward to this game, though, between Saquon Barkley and Dalvin Cook, two guys that we know we're going to start each and every week. Finally, a game here for Saquon Barkley, though, where we don't have to worry about the freezing cold temperatures because it's being played indoors. But most importantly, we finally saw some passing work going the way of Saquon Barkley. Just had a season high with 8 targets and added in 18 carries. However, still has no 100-yard rushing games since week 10, but does have touchdowns in 3 of his last 4. We know that volume isn't an issue. Minnesota allows over 21 fantasy points per contest. Still a lot of injuries in New York, right? Especially on that offensive line. They're still banged up, but this is a team that needs to keep winning, and they recognize that. We saw that down the stretch of last week's ball game. They're putting the ball in the hands of their best player, and Saquon Barkley looked pretty freaking good at the end of that game last week. We're definitely going to ride him once again here this week. And then Dalvin Cook was a great time for Dalvin Cook to absolutely explode and have his best game of the year. 190 total yards and a touchdown against the Indianapolis Colts. Now has touchdowns in 3 straight ball games. Now, Minnesota has clinched the division here, and they could choose to be a little careful at times with Dalvin Cook. So that's why maybe we have a little bit of concerns once we get to the X factor here. We know that volume isn't a problem, usually hovering right around 20 touches a game, sitting at right around 18. Now, the New York Giants allow the 11th most points in the league to opposing running backs at 21.6 and haven't allowed less than 150 yards rushing to a team since week 10. We got Garrett Bradbury still questionable. Christian Darrisaw came off the field a few times last week, looked to be cramping. He could be good to go here this week once again, but this is still a team that kind of needs to figure some things out, right? They can't always rely on making the NFL's biggest comeback of all time, right? They need to figure out what's going on at times with this offense so they're more consistent heading into the playoffs. However, a huge lead either way could mean some Dalvin Cook rest, so don't forget about that. But now that'll take us down to the Cincinnati Bengals, New England Patriots, and the Bengals have something to play for. Let's go ahead and start off by saying that when we're talking about Joe Mixon, they need to keep winning ball games, but Mixon was not great at all last week. Even though it was nice to see him get 5 receptions, if only they could go somewhere, right? We're not seeing the production from Joe Mixon that we really need at this point of the season. Now, a lot of that had to do with the game script last week. Tampa Bay got out to an early lead. Cincinnati had to rely on the deep passing game to play catch-up majority of the second half, but this matchup may not be much easier going up against New England. They're great against the run. They're allowing only 15.8 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and that is second fewest in all of fantasy football. But they have allowed Josh Jacobs and James Conner to have decent games against them in recent weeks. All the injuries, for the most part, on the defensive side of the football. But right now, I'm banking on the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals are motivated, have something to play for, and need to continue to win ball games to not only clinch playoff spots, but take some momentum into the playoffs. That's why I got Joe Mixon as a start, even though he may be a little bit lower in rankings than he has been over the last few weeks, which will then take us over to Ramondre Stevenson. Okay, Mondre, we see you out there, Mondre, and your 172 yards rushing on your hurt ankle. I mean, is this like the Josh Jacobs shin injury? What's going on here? Because that was also the most carries he's had in a game since week 6, and he averaged 9 yards per carry this past ball game. I mean, we know he's going to get volume. He's going to touch the ball right around 18 times a game. Going up against Cincinnati, they allow 18.8 points per contest, but really limited Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb over the last month of the season. New England has its own injuries, though, with Devontae Parker. Damian Harris still not 100% and questionable to play. Offensive tackle Isaiah Wynn. Multiple members of their secondary, which is somewhat concerning because if they're giving up points, they may not be able to run as much. But this guy is basically matchup proof, and he has proven that all year long because he's involved on the ground, he's involved in the air. The Patriots may be one of the dumbest football teams of all time right now after that play that they did to lose the ball game last week. We're hoping that those mistakes don't show themselves once again here this week. They're smart. They continue to rely on Mondre Stevenson, and we continue Steven season right in to the playoffs. He's an obvious start when healthy for sure. How about the Houston Texans and Tennessee Titans? Now we'll start off in Houston. No, I'm not considering it. Tennessee allows the fourth fewest points to opposing running backs. The Houston backfield is Royce Freeman and Dare Ogunbowale. Is that where you want to place all your fantasy chips in the fantasy playoffs with that backfield in this matchup? No, you're just not going to. How about for Derrick Henry, though? Abso-freaking-lutely. Derrick Henry against the team that allows the most fantasy points to running backs in fantasy football at 28.3 per contest, played them earlier in the season, ran for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns against them in Week 8, plus another team that needs to keep winning. They're motivated. The only thing I'm really paying attention to here is the health of Ryan Tannehill. Now, it sounds like as long as he's good to go, he'll play. As long as he can play through the pain. That's what we need, because if Malik Willis is at quarterback, that's going to bring down the ceiling of Derrick Henry this week. The opposing defense, maybe not having to worry about any type of passing game, can just load the box up against King Henry, but you know you're going to start him each and every week. What about the Washington Commandos, San Francisco 49ers? And the more I watch of Brian Robinson, the more I really like of Brian Robinson for the future. Not that I don't like Antonio Gibson. If you watched us for a long time, you know I'm a huge Antonio Gibson fan as well. It just seems like B-Rob has the better opportunity to shed off tacklers than Antonio Gibson does. He fights for the extra yardage just a little bit better. And he now has 80+ rushing yards in 4 of his last 5 games and has averaged over 10 yards per reception, all while splitting snaps with Antonio Gibson. Now, while they're still split fairly close, 50-50 for the most part, the touches are going the way of Brian Robinson. Gibson hasn't had 10+ carries in a ball game since Week 11 and doesn't have a touchdown since Week 10. Brian Robinson had a touchdown just last week that was stolen from him by some phantom call because Terry McLaurin wasn't lined up on the line of scrimmage. That whole debacle, I'm not here to debate that. It's just the whole situation's a little bit iffy to me. Brian Robinson got in on that play. That would have been a great touchdown for a lot of people, but this matchup absolutely sucks for these guys. Going up against San Francisco, they allow only 13.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which is fewest in the league, and 13.1 points split 2 ways isn't great. Last time I checked, not a math whiz, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to be good, right? They haven't allowed over 70 yards rushing to a team since Week 7 has San Francisco. This offensive line still pretty banged up. A road game in San Francisco against the number 1 run defense. Even though I love Brian Robinson, the ceiling's going to be too low here. Got both these guys as a sit. For their opponent, you got Christian McCaffrey. Now, we know that CMC is a locked-in weekly start, but the 49ers are another team that have clinched the division, so don't be surprised if we don't see crazy CMC volume because they want to keep him healthy heading into the playoffs. Maybe we see a little bit more Jordan Mason going forward. Now, obviously, when he's healthy, he's a guy that's going to get 20+ touches, right? So maybe we just temper expectations slightly. Going up against Washington, they're pretty good against the run as well, allowing only 17.4 fantasy points per contest, 7th fewest in the league. No other major injuries of concern here that are affecting Christian McCaffrey. It's just the risk we run with playing this late into the NFL season, which I know is normal for fantasy football, but when teams clinch early, it makes fantasy football an absolute nightmare. We kind of just have to keep our fingers crossed, hope for some good volume, hope for some early touchdowns, because if he gets rested, it'll be later in the game. How about we go down to the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys? We'll start off for Philadelphia. And if you wanted to know what it looks like in fantasy football when someone absolutely just craps the bed, I'm talking full-on toddler diarrhea crap the bed, look at Miles Sanders' box score for just last week in Week 15. Dude even had 1 reception for negative 13 yards. How the hell do you go backwards 13 yards? Also fumbled. A total downer of a week for Miles Sanders, but we need to find a way to get something similar to what we got just back in Week 6 when these two teams faced off. Then Miles Sanders had 18 carries for 71 yards and a touchdown. If we could get something like that this week, I would be very grateful, especially since the Dallas defense has kind of been torched here as of late, giving up over 100 yards rushing in 3 straight ball games, but is only allowing 16.6 fantasy points per game to running backs on the year. But when you look at this contest, all eyes are on Jalen Hurts. Is he going to play? Are we going to find ourselves with some Minshew mania in Philadelphia once again? One way or another, the Eagles will be somewhat cautious with most of their players. They know they're going to the playoffs. They're not going to overly batter these guys heading into the postseason. Does that mean that Miles Sanders doesn't get huge volume? it means that Miles Sanders should still get right around 16 touches or so because they need to make sure they keep this running game moving in the right direction. They don't want to have these type of struggles once they reach the postseason, so Miles Sanders still a start. Their opponents, Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard. This has been one of the safest backfields in all of 2022, whether you want to admit it or not. It's just another week with Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott going out there, scoring over 12 fantasy points. Zeke now has touchdowns in 7 straight ball games, including 13 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown in week 6 against this same Philadelphia Eagles team. In that game, Pollard struggled a little bit more, only had 52 total yards and no touchdown. On the season, the Philadelphia Eagles allowing 20.4 fantasy points per game and have allowed over 120 yards rushing now in back-to-back ball games to Chicago and the New York Giants. No other major injuries of concern for Dallas. With Jalen Hurts questionable, we have an even better opportunity that Dallas keeps this game close. It's a great game to watch, and they utilize both guys in this backfield once again, so they're going to remain a start. They're just too consistent not to. What about the Las Vegas Raiders and the Pittsburgh Steelers? We'll start off with Josh Jacobs, and it's crazy when Josh Jacobs goes out, gets 110 total yards, 12 fantasy points, and people are disappointed about it. It's because the bar has been set so freaking high. He's had at least 100 total yards now in 5 straight ball games, hasn't had under 20 touches in a game since week 8. Going up against Pittsburgh, they've allowed 19.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs and have also allowed 140 plus rushing yards in 2 of their last 3 ball games this season. Now, 4 members of their offensive line are currently on the injury report, which is not ideal. Alex Bars, Jackson Barton, Andrew Billings, and Dylan Parham are all pieces of this offensive line that we would like to have available going into this ball game. But he's the number 1 overall running back in fantasy football. Those are the type of guys that we start in the fantasy playoffs, especially in the cold temperatures of Pittsburgh. How about Najee Harris? Now, crazy to think how the season started for Najee, and now he's all the way up to running back 15 overall, coming off a season high in carries with 24. Has touchdowns in 4 of his last 5 games played, even though there's still no sign of pass catching work. Was it last week that I offered Kyle's paycheck for them to start throwing the ball to Najee? Apparently that wasn't enough, I guess. I mean, he's averaging right around 17 touches a game, which is still pretty good. He needs that volume. He always has. He's not overly efficient, but now he gets a great matchup going up against Las Vegas, who allows the 5th most points to opposing running backs at 23.6 per game. Sounds like Kenny Pickett should be back and under center, and I'm going to ride the hot hand while I can and hope for another touchdown from Najee Harris. But you know what? I say we do something we haven't done all year, because now we're going to head into Sunday football. It's going to be Christmas time. A lot of people are going to be out there opening up a bunch of presents. So you know what? Let's hip thrust it. Let's hip thrust it right into Christmas football. Just like this with the Green Bay Packers and Miami Dolphins. We'll start it off with Green Bay, Aaron Jones, and A.J. Dillon. A matchup of 2 teams that need to keep winning games that they're being played. But this one could be a little bit ugly, right? There's a big chance of rain in this ball game. Both these guys in Green Bay had great games just last week. A.J. Dillon finding the end zone a couple times before leaving with a possible concussion. He should be good to go. He's already cleared concussion protocol. Aaron Jones with a solid game as well. But it's still a pretty even split. And as we get into these wintry months, we start to see more and more A.J. Dillon, the battering ram in this offense that's super hard to tackle when temperatures are below 0. Now they get a matchup against Miami. They allow over 21.7 fantasy points per game, 10th most in the league to opposing quarterbacks. Like I mentioned, A.J. Dillon already cleared concussion protocol, so should be good to go. But let's be honest here. This isn't your mama's Packers team anymore. This isn't the team that Aaron Rodgers is going to go out each and every week and throw for over 300 yards. They want to run the football, and they want to run the football a lot this time of year. Even though this isn't going to be one of those cold weather games, with the rain potential there, we could see a heavy dose once again of these running backs. Both of them are going to be fired up as a start this week, with A.J. Dillon more so being in that RB 25 to 30 range with some potential upside as a flex play this week. Their opponents, Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., and we just saw the best game of the year from Raheem Mostert. 17 carries for 136 yards and 1 reception for 20 yards, but no touchdown just last week. Absolutely torched the Bills on the ground in that cold weather ball game. But Miami has lost 3 straight now and are in absolute desperation mode to start winning ball games here once again. We know the passing game is going to eat up most of the touches in this offense in Miami, but if they want to have success, they can really exploit the Green Bay defense on the ground this week. The only reason this Green Bay defense looked somewhat decent last week against the Rams is because they were facing the Rams and Cam Akers, and they can't run it in LA. Green Bay allows over 22 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Jeff Wilson still day-to-day at the time of this recording, unsure whether or not he's even going to play. This one really comes down to availability. As much as I think that Jeff Wilson Jr. does not play in this game, I have no issues firing up Raheem Mostert. Now, if for whatever reason we head into the weekend and Jeff Wilson Jr. is 100% good to go, I probably still lean Raheem Mostert, but I drop him way down my rankings in that RB 20 to 25 range because the split is once again going to hamper the ceiling of both of these guys if they were to both play. How about Denver and LA? Now, the Rams, and out of nowhere, Latavius Murray comes out with 130 yards rushing and a touchdown, and all of a sudden, people all over fantasy football land want to throw him into their rosters in the middle of the fantasy playoffs. Now, prior to last week, this dude had only had one fantasy startable game as a Denver Bronco all year, and it was in week 8 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Are we really expecting to have another huge game from Latavius Murray? Now, granted, the Rams defense is not good, especially without Aaron Donald, but we don't even know if Aaron Donald's going to play or not yet. Doubtful if I had to guess. Going up against the Rams, they allow 20 fantasy points per contest, 19th in the league. But this is another team that's beat up on the offensive line. Kendall Hinton is hurt. Cortland Sutton is hurt. Russell Wilson is still not playing. There's so many questions in Denver. I don't know if I want to go on a road game to LA in an offense that totally lacks consistency and a guy who struggles to score fantasy points more times than not as somebody that I want to throw in my playoff roster of my fantasy football team. I'm going to continue to sit Latavius Murray, and if he goes off again, then so be it. I don't want any part of that offense. How about for Cam Akers? Nope, because just like that, the defending champs are done for the year. They've been eliminated from the playoffs. Not a ton to really play for in this ballgame on either side. Both teams equally bad. I'm actually kind of glad that we have this game on Christmas Day. It's going to give us all time to turn the TV off and enjoy some family time together for 3 hours or so until a better game. Actually, it's not even that much better comes on that. We're going to have a lot of time on Christmas Day to spend with family because not a lot of great games to watch after the Green Bay and Miami game. I'm not really considering Cam Akers. Denver allows 19.5 fantasy points per game, which isn't bad, but the offensive line is running out of options in LA. One of two things could happen here. Cam Akers could rush for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns, or he could rush for 35 yards and no touchdowns. That's just not a chance I'm willing to take. I'm not banking on touchdowns that heavily on a team that doesn't score very many touchdowns. I don't want to get pissed off and disappointed on Christmas Day, so I'm going to sit Cam Akers. How about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Arizona Cardinals? We got Uncle Lenny Fournette, and then we also have Rachaad White. And this is weird. This is a weird dynamic in this backfield. Everybody in fantasy football world is either Team Lenny or Team Rachaad White. Very few people want to admit the fact that it doesn't really matter. This backfield isn't overly good, no matter which running back you like more. But they're still fighting for the playoffs in Tampa Bay. And now they're going to be on the road in Arizona. This backfield isn't getting anything going, but here's the facts. This is what I can tell you. Over the last 3 games, only one 10-plus point fantasy performance between the two guys. They're basically splitting 50-50 when it comes to touches. Neither are averaging over 10 fantasy points per game over the last month of the season. The passing work for both of these guys is sporadic. There's limited scoring chances. Should I go on? You know this team is a team that's been lately falling behind and having to throw the ball a lot, which would typically bode well for 2 pass-catching running backs, but it's just too up and down. It's too hit and miss. There's no consistency in this backfield. Now, Arizona, they allow 22.7 fantasy points per game, 8th most in the league. The multiple injuries on the offensive line still here for Tampa Bay. You got Julio Jones banged up, Vita Vea, Jamel Dean, Antoine Winfield in the secondary. Another team that can be had through the air. Who's the quarterback going to be for Arizona, right? Is it Colt McCoy? Is it Trace McSorley? I'm hoping it's Colt McCoy because Trace McSorley isn't going to tempt this secondary very much, and maybe that could help keep this game closer. I don't feel safe. I don't have that warm fuzzy. I'm not excited to start either one of these guys, but it's a good matchup going up against Arizona. Leonard Fournette has been more consistent as of late. Rachaad White has the higher ceiling. If you wanted to play it safer, it's Lenny. If you wanted to gamble for the higher ceiling, it's Rachaad White. In my opinion, you're going to have to just close your eyes and pick one. Right now, I picked Leonard Fournette just for consistency purposes. Their opponent, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. And at this point, James Conner is kind of like that old reliable pickup, right? He's not flashy. He gets you to where you're going. Along the way, people look at it and admire it, but you never see it at a car show, right? That's kind of what James Conner is right now. He has touchdowns in 5 straight games, but his yardage totals have been a little bit lower. He has no game all year long in which he's exceeded over 30 yards receiving, and only 2 games all season long with over 75 yards rushing. But those 2 games have come in the last 3 that they've played. He's kind of picking it up here as of late, but going up against Tampa Bay, not the easiest of matchups. They're allowing 17.1 fantasy points per contest. But if he gets anywhere near that number, James Conner owners are going to be pretty freaking happy. Offensive line once again banged up in Arizona, and the secondary is really hurting right now as well. But the biggest question mark, who's playing quarterback? Hoping for Colt McCoy so we can have a closer ball game here and give these guys an opportunity to score just a little bit. Now, obviously, we can't sit the touchdown upside of James Conner. It's just been too consistent here as of late. Hopefully in the offense that he's in here this week, not really knowing what's going to happen at the quarterback position, he's kind of penciled in as the guy that's the safest option that could get the most volume in this offense, kind of make up for some of the passing game inefficiencies. So we'll start James Conner, and then I'll take us over to Monday Night Football. Los Angeles Chargers, Indianapolis Colts, Austin Eckler. You know what to do here. You're going to start Austin Eckler going up against the Colts. They allow the 6th most points to opposing running backs. It seemed like we escaped an Austin Eckler injury just last week. Went into the blue medical tent, but came back into the game. Didn't get a lot of volume after that, though. So we're definitely paying attention to his practice reports here throughout the week. But it's Austin Eckler as long as he's healthy in a must-win game. You're going to start Austin Eckler. And then the backfield of the Indianapolis Colts. Why are all the Zach Moss truthers coming back out right now? And they're trying to talk crap in the comment section everywhere. I see it on social media. I see it in YouTube comments all over the place. People just hopping on the bandwagon of Zach Moss. Do you not realize that this dude just got 24 touches and failed to get double-digit fantasy points? What does he need? Like 30-plus touches in order to hit 10 fantasy points? I'm not excited about this backfield at all. It's another team that's just basically said, piss on it for the rest of the year. They've given up at times. They're totally hit and miss. They can be elite. They can be horrendous in the same ball game. Going up against the Chargers isn't a bad matchup. They allow 24 fantasy points per contest. We know that Jonathan Taylor is done for the year. I personally like Deion Jackson a little bit more than Zach Moss, but apparently the coaching staff in Indianapolis wants to go the way of Zach Moss for whatever reason. I mean, I know we've questioned the coaching decisions in Indianapolis multiple times here over the last month or so, so this is no surprise that we're questioning yet another one. Could one of these guys have a good day? Sure. Do I want to risk my fantasy playoff status on either one of these guys? Nope, especially not if it's Zach Moss. But there you have it, my starts and sits for the running back position here. Week 16 fantasy football. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure you hit the like button down below and consider subscribing even if you just found us. We talk football and have fun all year long. This is not the time to just say, you know what, I'm done with it for the next 6 to 8 months, because then all of a sudden you find yourself falling behind and playing catch up the entire season because you didn't pay attention for half the year. Have a lot of fun with us here this offseason. We're looking forward to it. Hoping a lot of people walk away with some championship trophies as well. But for now, I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and we'll talk to you later.